German Marshall Fund gathering in Brussels, Belgium, saw Secretary Pompeo telling European leaders that, quote, American leadership allowed us to enjoy the greatest human flourishing in modern history. We won the Cold War, we won the peace, unquote. But that he quickly followed up by stating, after the Cold War ended, we allowed this liberal order to begin corroding the American people. It failed us in some places, and sometimes it failed you and the rest of the world. Multilateralism has too often become viewed as an end unto itself. The more treaties we sign, the safer we supposedly are. The more bureaucrats we have, the better the jobs get done, right? Was that ever really true? The central question that we face is the question of whether the system, as currently configured, as it exists today, and as the world exists today, does it work? Does it work for all the people around the world? With Secretary Pompeo speaking to an audience of European Union leaders whose 500 million European peoples are de facto ruled by over 80 million or so peoples of Germany. His question as to if the Western bureaucratic system of multilateralism was even working anymore was being answered on the violence-racked streets and collapsing governments throughout Europe. That today sees German Chancellor Angela Merkel being thrown out of power, British Prime Minister Theresa May about to be thrown out of power, Italy outright rejecting EU orders, Spain preparing to tear itself apart, Greece being bloodied by near-daily riots, and worst of all, France, whose horrors today are showing the vision of what all of Western Europe will look like tomorrow. And that includes a French government threatening a bloody crackdown on its own citizens protesting unjust taxes, and who have assembled nearly 90,000 military and police forces to carry out this threat, whose first assault was against thousands of protesting high school teenagers that were lined up against walls and beaten like prisoners going to an execution, to the outrage of the entire French nation. And even to this very hour now sees France in a virtual state of war as tens of thousands of protesters are being gassed, beaten, and arrested by their own supposed liberal socialist government. With Secretary Pompeo knowing that President Trump's approval rating towers over those of his Western European leader counterparts, he proceeded to slam the world's current version of multilateralism by castigating everyone from the United Nations, the peacekeeping missions drag on for decades, no closer to peace, to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, who have mismanaged their economic affairs to impose austerity measures that inhibit growth and crowd out private sector actors, with his then declaring to these European leaders, every nation must honestly acknowledge its responsibilities to its citizens and ask if the current international order serves the good of its people as well as it could, and if not, we must ask how we can do it right. To remedy the objective failure of Western multilateralism, Secretary Pompeo put forth the vision of a New World Order ruled by nation-states, with his stating, quote, "This is what President Trump is doing. He is returning the United States to its traditional, central leadership role in the world. He sees the world as it is, not as he wishes it to be. He knows that nothing can replace the nation-state as the guarantor of democratic freedoms and national interests." To how the United States and its European Union vassal states wish to rule themselves, be it by multilateralism or nation-states, is of no concern to Russia at all, as it has never signed up for its being ruled over by America in the first place, or anyone else for that matter, and because of, along with other nations refusing to give up their sovereignty to the West, saw Mike Pompeo stating, "Make no mistake, the mainstream left and state-serving media voices are trying to gaslight or manipulate someone by psychological means, into questioning their own sanity, an entire generation into believing any candidate that wants peace with Russia may be a foreign conspirator worthy of prison, shame, and family persecution. And of course, not being explained to the American people as to why Russia needs to be demonized is due to what is now being called the Great Oil Crash of 2018, that the United States itself caused when it went from importing $130 billion worth of oil in 2017 to its oil imports plunging to zero by March of 2018. To this past week, it's becoming a net oil exporter for the first time in 75 years. This consequence of the United States ceasing to import oil has caused the world to be glutted with oil, a long-term situation being compounded by President Trump opening up for the first time in history Alaska's vast Arctic National Wildlife Refuge for oil drilling that may hold up to 16 billion barrels of oil, but that is dwarfed into nearly insignificance after the United States Geological Survey announced this past week that it had discovered the largest contiguous oil and gas resources ever in the Texas and New Mexico Delaware Basin, containing up to 46 billion barrels of oil. The critical problem facing President Trump and the American citizens is that their high-priced oil can't compete on the global market with its largest competitors, most particularly Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela, whose oil production costs are mere pennies compared to the U.S., all of whom are being targeted with propaganda demonizing campaigns, but excludes communist China, who remains the largest oil importer in the world, whom everyone knows is now the greatest threat the United States has ever faced, but whose greatest fears are pointed towards the United States, whom the entire world now sees as a major threat. To the world, viewing the United States as a major threat is more than justified, as a nearing majority of its peoples are now worshiping at the altars of environmentalism and pessimism, and whose left Democrats are now debating how much blood they're willing to spill to disarm patriotic Americans, with Democratic Party leader Tom Perez himself now lamenting the influence churches have on voters, which makes it more difficult for the leftist Democrats' message to penetrate because Christian voters buy what they hear. So, as President Trump inevitably has warned the American people, when will the American people awaken to the reality that Russia fears these leftist lunatics as much as they do, and will nuke them into ashes at the first sign they're taking power again? Well, not if President Trump has anything to do about it.
Democrats having some problems connecting with voters, and the DNC chair, Tom Perez, says maybe the church is to blame. Watch this.
I had someone in northwestern Wisconsin tell me, you know what? For most of the people I know, their principal sources of information are Fox News, their NRA newsletter, and the pulpit on Sunday. And it should come as a surprise to no one that our message doesn't penetrate, because that person on the pulpit is saying, ignore everything else that this person has done and is doing. We have to focus on one issue of Roe versus Wade. And people buy it because that's their only source.
Well, let's bring in our panel for some reaction. Dr. Robert Jeffress, of course, senior pastor at First Baptist Dallas, a Fox News contributor. Dr. Susan Johnson Cook, former ambassador-at-large for international religious freedom under the Obama administration, and Muslim scholar Dr. Quanta Ahmed. We appreciate all of you being here. I want to start with Susan Cook. What do you make of the DNC chair and his comments?
Well, you know, I come from a history where the pulpit has been used for good. In terms, I was a practicing pastor. I was the International Religious Freedom Ambassador. And so pulpits can be used for good. Certainly the civil rights movement was birthed out of the pulpit. Many churches churches, made sure that there was justice and equality for our people. Now, on the other side, some pulpits are being used not for good. If you're supporting the NRA and other places that actually kill people or promote gun use, we've had so many people die from gun violence. So I think you have to be very careful about the way the pulpit is used.
Hang on, Susan, I'm going to let you a chance, but to suggest the NRA is killing people, that is an extreme statement. They are fighting for the Second Amendment. I'm not going to do their bidding, but they support the Second Amendment and the freedom to have a gun. The NRA, to be clear, is not killing people.
With the number of deaths we've had because of handguns, nobody's put a check on the NRA. And I think no matter what, we have to talk about the number of violent deaths we've had because of handguns in this country. And so that is an NRA issue. So on the other side, though, let me just say the pulpit has been used for good in terms of civil rights and justice for people who have been killed and slaughtered as a people.
Well,
I'm a historical person.
Okay, pardon me. I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to get to everyone else. Dr. Jeffress, I hear what Susan's saying. I hear what the DNC chair is saying is basically if they don't agree with the NRA, then somehow maybe they're forgetting about the First Amendment.
Look, the most damning concession that the DNC chairman has made is that people who get their information from churches are likely to, quote, shun the Democrat Party. And there's a reason for that. The Democrat Party is increasingly becoming a godless party, and I mean that literally. A few years ago, they tried to remove God from their party platform. Millions of Americans saw that. Not only that, they have unbiblical views of sexuality and certainly abortion. Here's a party that not only allows but actually celebrates the right to murder 1.4 million children in the womb every year, and good Christian Democrats are having trouble reconciling their faith with a Democrat platform. It's like a Democrat deacon said in my church recently. He said, quoting Reagan, you know, I'm not leaving the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is leaving me.
All right, let's get to Dr. Ahmed. You weigh in here as a Muslim scholar. What are your thoughts?
I mean, first of all, as an American at the end of this week, I gathered around the pulpit to honor a great president being laid to rest. Pulpits are so much more than politics, and I found the remarks of Perez demeaning and showing an extraordinary contempt for all people of faith, whether it's Muslims or Christians or Jewish people. Additionally, I'd like to challenge the Democrats on their remarks about faith-going, church-going Americans. They've been sharing or attending pulpits of some very questionable figures. Louis Farrakhan is one that comes to mind, the Nation of Islam, some associations with the Muslim Brotherhood. So I would say America is a nation of faith. This is our strength that we go to congregations, and it is not a source of indoctrination.
Okay, Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Jeffress, Susan Cook, I'll give you 15 seconds to be fair.
I just take offense with people saying Democrats are godless. I'm very much a godly woman, and so I take offense with that, and it's a danger for people who are not in the pulpit to challenge those who are.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of your thoughts. Gave everybody a fair chance. Thanks for coming in. Okay, thank you.